This is Judaism Unbound, episode 451, Jewish Weddings. Who is the client? Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're continuing our series of episodes exploring Jewish weddings with our guest, Jewish wedding officiant extraordinaire and rabbi and spiritual leader, Irwin Keller. Over the last few weeks, we've been doing a deep dive on the high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we'll be coming back to that subject next week. But today, we wanted to continue the conversations we began over the summer about how we might conceptualize and reconceptualize Jewish weddings. For some of our other recent podcasts on this theme, check out our episode 439 with Ari Sachs and episode 445 with our executive director, Miriam Turlinchamp. But before we dive in, a quick reminder that we have a bunch of brand new 8-week courses available in the Unyeshiva. They begin later in October, but you're going to get busy with the high holidays, so you can and should register now. Head over to judaismunbound.com/classes and sign up for one or all of the Rambam's theology with Lainey Solomon. Rambam is the Hebrew way to say Maimonides. Also, Gender in Judaism with Sarah Imhoff. Jewish Communities in Africa, Asia, and the New World with Juan Mejia, and Fierce Women of Torah with Alicia Jo Rabins. You're not going to want to miss these great opportunities for learning and unlearning. Financial aid is available for any of these classes just by filling in a simple form. So register now at judaismunbound.com/classes. And now for today's conversation. Our guest today, Irwin Keller, is rabbi and spiritual leader at Congregation Ner Shalom in California. That's in Sonoma County, where he has served since 2008. And he is the author of a terrific new book called Shekhinah at the Art Institute that we're going to discuss in the second half of today's episode. In the first half, though, we'll discuss Jewish weddings. Irwin Keller is a frequent officiant of Jewish weddings. He had a profound experience of his own that he's spoken about in a TED Talk called Irwin Keller, A Love Story. We'll talk about that in today's episode as well. And he even wrote a paper exploring the innovative potential of mobilizing the Book of Ruth in Jewish wedding ceremonies. Irwin Keller was ordained as a rabbi in the same class as Lex through Aleph ordination programs. He is also a drag queen and an activist. Irwin Keller has served as founder and faculty of the Taproot community since 2017. His advocacy work included authoring Chicago's first comprehensive human rights law, which has been in effect since 1989, and serving at the helm of the AIDS Legal Referral Panel of the San Francisco Bay Area. Irwin Keller is also a founder and for 21 years a performer with the Kinsey Six, America's favorite dragapella beauty shop quartet. So let's dive in. Irwin Keller, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. Treat.
So I want to start with a story that I think I've probably told on the podcast, but I was on a search committee for a rabbi at one point a decade ago or so. And one of the people that we interviewed, I asked them if they would perform an intermarriage. This was a conservative synagogue.
It's like 6 times, Dan. Just to be clear about the number. But I love it. It's a good story, and you haven't told it today
I'm
yet,
getting old.
So we're good.
So the rabbi said as much as he might like to perform an intermarriage, he can't because being a rabbi, he's only given authority to marry 2 Jews. And one of the other members of the search committee sat back in his chair and said, "That's silly. The state gives you that authority." So these 2 people had profoundly different visions of what the rabbi is doing in a Jewish wedding or what the rabbi's role is in a Jewish wedding. The rabbi thinks he's doing something that Jewish law is giving him the authority to do and has to be done in a very particular way. And the congregant thinks that the rabbi is performing a kind of officiant function to give a Jewish flavor, a Jewish element, or perhaps to put Judaism at the center of a process that actually is something that the state puts into place. So I'm wondering, as a starting point, when you think about performing a wedding, what do you think the job is? I'm not saying between those 2, but I'm saying what do you think the job is of the wedding for the people, well, for any of the people involved?
Yeah, thanks. What a good question. It's interesting to me that even though we think about Jewish weddings as having a particular form with particular people standing there saying particular things, two people could exchange traditional Jewish words. The words could be said, the ring could be given with witnesses, and no rabbi needs to be standing there at all. So even in our halachic view, you don't need a person to solemnize. You don't need a person standing there to make it real. And I love that. I love that about our tradition. The rabbi is there as sort of a professional facilitator, but not as somebody who's bringing some kind of special authority. The way I think about it when I'm working with people who are getting married is that what I'm trying to do is to focus what they want to be, what they want to say to each other, the life they want to create together, and just be somebody who kind of channels their intention into a ceremonial framework so that when the wedding happens, it doesn't feel like an expression of rabbinic authority. It doesn't feel like an expression of state authority. It doesn't feel like anything external to the couple themselves, but feels like an expression that's now being made in a way that allows them and the people around them to feel the holiness of the moment and feel some kind of transformation. So I like thinking of myself as some kind of facilitator and not as somebody who has the authority to make someone married who wasn't before.
And why do you think that that's an important thing? Like, what would happen if that you just described didn't happen, and that's true all the time, right? I mean, there's people that live together and they never have a wedding. They never get married. What do you see as the difference between somebody that does have a wedding and somebody that doesn't?
I can't speak for all of the range of couples who make their choices for various reasons. In a culture that has state-sanctioned marriage, that comes with benefits, immigration benefits, and all sorts of insurance benefits. Two people who love each other who get married only so they could be on each other's insurance. That's legitimate. That's a legitimate thing that you might want to do for your partner. And it makes me think about my own experience in a relationship with another man where we weren't allowed to marry, where for the first 15 years of our life as a couple, marriage was unavailable to us. Because it was unavailable to us, I was very critical of marriage as an institution. I really thought, why are we even doing this? This privileging of couplehood by the state there's no reason for it, and the inherent sexism in so many of the marital forms, the marriage forms, I don't see a way to undo it. And I was full of criticism about marriage. And then in 2000, maybe I'll go back to 2004, when Mayor Gavin Newsom, then San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom, authorized the city to grant marriage licenses to same-sex couples. It was obviously not going to be upheld by any court because cities in the U.S. don't have that authority to make marriage law. But it was marvelous political theater. And people, people who were adults at the time will all remember the media coverage of couples standing around the block in the rain, waiting for
including
a turn.
my uncles.
Oh, that's right. And yeah, including Eric and Crispin, yeah. And people stood in line in the rain, and people from all over the country were sending cake and flowers to the people standing in line. And we were married on the last day of that. About a half an hour after our marriage happened, the court ordered a stop to it. So we were in the last breath of those kind of protest marriages. And I went from going into it thinking, I'm going to do it because it's a historic moment and I want to be part of it and it's an important political thing to do. Having a moment of being witnessed as a couple in that way, and our desire to give our lives to each other in a loving and solemn way, it turned me around. I understood something about what marriage could be, and my attempts to dismiss marriage as unimportant or meaningless evaporated in that moment. Being seen, being witnessed is transformative. I was thinking about something similar regarding our rabbinic ordination, that I was working as a rabbi for, 14 years before I received my rabbinic ordination, and had a similar kind of, who needs their stinking piece of paper feel about it until the ordination happened. And I realized that that kind of witnessing is transformative. It caused a shift in me. And same with the marriage. It caused, when I was able to call my husband without quotation marks around it, without it being a sarcastic term, an ironic term, to call him husband, because obviously he can never be my husband. When it became something real in some new sense, it changed something for both of us. It changed something, not just how people thought about us, but also how we thought about ourselves. It was a big moment for me, and it has really informed how I understand the couples that I work with. And I mostly don't work with queer couples. I mostly work with, heteronormative couples, but I'm able to see them and their love and desire around marriage in a way that I think I couldn't fully before.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I do think marriage is sacred. What I most think is sacred, though, is ritual. Like, I love ritual. And I've actually worked with couples who they may or may not be getting married legally. And there are many couples I've worked with where I am helping them with a ceremony, but they've done a legal piece separate. So what I'm doing is not part of that process. And that's actually very liberating in many ways, because what we're doing is stripped entirely of like the process practically to receive a certain status. And then what it becomes is, just what do we want to do with one another and a bunch of our loved ones in a space together? And that's actually a very delightful opportunity. And I say to couples, independent of the marriage status, I do actually think like reality transforms. Like I might not be a mystic in every way, but I am a mystic in the way that I actually think that from 2 minutes before that wedding ceremony starts to 2 minutes after it ends, I actually think that the fabric of the universe has been transformed, and that the two of you that are saying things to one another have actually done an action that shifts your world, and that in turn shifts everything.
I just want to say that is so beautiful, the way you said that. That is so beautiful, Lex.
Well, thank you. I really think it. And like, it informs how I go about it. It means that the words we choose, the steps taken, the things on the walls or in the pews or in the whatever, like all of it is doing ritual work, and what that work is has consequence. Now, I sense that you agree. And so my curiosity is basically, what is the transformation? What's the chemical reaction that's happening? And the obvious out is there's different ones for different couples. And I think that's true. But to the extent there's like some set of general transformations that might be happening, Jewishly or otherwise, what are they?
I'm thinking about the language between Ruth and Naomi, which I sense we will come back to later. But the language between Ruth and Naomi, which is, I think, some of the most beautiful bonding language that we have in Jewish tradition, where Ruth says to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. And where you die, there I will die, and I will die, and there I will be buried." Just a stunning words of commitment. And it's not clearly a romantic relationship. You can read it that way, but it's a relationship between a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, at least in the pshat, that is sort of at the plot level. It's a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. And life circumstances have made it so that they are better off together than apart. And Torah shows us how much they care about each other. And they say these words, which I use all the time for weddings. I have not found words that I like better as vow language in a wedding than the words in the book of Ruth. And I think the fact that it comes from a couple that's not clearly marrying, even if they're clearly not a heterosexual couple, they're intergenerational. They're together because of family circumstance brought them into this place of deep commitment to each other. I think that opens a lot of doors for us to think about what are the kinds of relationships that we might want to honor with sacred words, with sacred ritual.
It's in chapter 1 of the book of Ruth. For those who are curious, we'll have it in the show notes. What I think is so interesting about it is it tends to be read in a very specific way that I don't think is automatically suggested by the text. It tends to be read as Ruth. So Ruth's the one saying it, and she's a Moabite. And people read it as her sort of discarding that which she has been and becoming what Naomi is, an Israelite. So it's read as inflected, your God will be my God. Where you lie, I will. It's suggesting like Ruth is putting aside her piece and showing her devote. I mean, if you read it romantically, Ruth is showing like an unbelievable devotion to a potential partner because she's willing to sort of discard of herself. Now, I think you could equally read that quote as, where you lie, I will lie. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people. That actually, and I think the way your couples probably use it is not that one of them is discarding of themselves. It's actually a meeting place. It's, oh, you and I have lodged in different places in the past. You and I have different notions of God. By the way, that would apply to two Jews. It would apply to two non-Jews. It would apply to one Jew and one, I actually think that what's happening is that statement, when you don't have it in the context of Ruth is converting, it's, oh, we're actually going to be in a process of meeting one another. And what your God is and what my God is, they're not the same, but we're going to find ways for them to cohabit so that we can light candles together to the same and say the same God thing or whatever it is that it might be.
The understanding of Ruth as a convert, as the righteous convert, the model of a righteous convert, that comes to us as early as Talmud. And there's a way in which I think that whole, there's a lot of ink in Talmud around this, and adding to the story, adding to the conversation that they're having, and in which Naomi starts speaking back and trying to discourage Ruth. There's a lot of energy spent on constituting this as a conversion, and Ruth going into this with her eyes open, really wanting to be a Jew. I think in some ways it's because the simple meaning of the text, I want to share this path with you. I just want to share your path, your life. I want to be part of it. I think that was problematic. I think one woman saying that to another, one woman having that kind of agency, it was a challenge. And so I think in some ways it was turned into this model conversion as a way of taming it, of domesticating it, closing out the sort of the wild love and commitment that can come from people's hearts in all sorts of circumstances that are, where there is no prescriptive form for it. There is no form for what happens when the two widows in the family end up alone and dependent on each other and traveling together and full of care for each other and wanting somehow to survive and to flourish again one day. There is no name for a ceremony for that. And I think it was too free and too wild. And so turning it into a conversion scene was a way to hold it and contain it, to contain the possibilities that were inherent in it.
Wow, that is so interesting. I love that.
You don't love that they tamed it. You love that you're identifying.
No, I love your interpretation. Yeah. I mean, I love your explanation of it. Yeah, it's so interesting. So I want to get really practical about weddings and officiating at weddings. Could you share a little bit about how you go about it? And at least in my mind, there are two moments that I'm thinking about. Maybe there are more moments really that you would think about. One is the pre-wedding, is saying, how do I shape this particular ceremony for this particular couple? And what do you have to be thinking about? How do you get the information that you need? And then the other moment feels to me, I mean, it's also in the preparation more than in the actual wedding, but I'm just thinking about the parts of the traditional wedding. Mm-hmm. Some people know what they all are. Some people know a few of them. Rabbis tend to know all of them and get very fixated on, well, we have to do them all, and regular people are kind of like, but why? So I'm curious how you have modified, or how you, I guess there's two things that you could do, right? One is that you could modify a practice if the old way that the practice is done doesn't quite work, but it still seems like a basically good practice. And the other thing that you can do is do it the old way, but give it a new explanation, essentially, but whether to the couple or to the people that are assembled, but really say, it used to be that when you gave the ring, you were kind of acquiring the bride, but we don't believe in that anymore, but we still give a ring because X, and that's not really a modification of the ritual, but it's a modification of the explanation. So Just curious, like how practically, tell us like how you do all this.
Yeah. I want to invoke the name of Lex's and my classmate of blessed memory, Rabbi Sarah Tauber, who said to me once, behind every halachic question is a hidden pastoral question. And what she meant by that is every decision that you're making around what Jewish law or custom has a place, there are real people who are expressing a real need, something that they are asking the tradition for. The majority of couples that I work with, the majority of them are interfaith couples, and the majority of them, the Jewish member of the couple is not coming from a conservative or Orthodox background, but they're arriving because they feel a desire, a burning for rituals that involve lineage, that have an ancientness to them. For them, that's a piece of how to solemnize, how to make this transformation happen. When I say they're coming to me, they're not coming to me, they're coming to our tradition and saying, what do you have for me? With the life that I have, what do you have for me that I can understand, that I can embrace, and that will make me feel solidly held by our people, by our lineage? So for the couples that come to me, a lot of the language, the Jewish language in wedding ritual is meaningless to them. They've never heard it. There are a few people who will have maybe some memory of Harayat Mikudeshet Li, behold, you are consecrated to me, the traditional words that in Orthodox tradition, the groom says to the bride, and in more recent traditions, sometimes the bride says back. But often they don't even have that. So for instance, I will offer it. I'll say, here are some options. Here's what your grandparents said. And this is what it means. And I'll offer it to them in that way, as an heirloom, as something that can be theirs if they want it. And it makes it be less out of the blue and instead something that's come down through the family. But I'll also tell them sort of what it means and how it's used and how it's been held over time, which is as kind of code language for a certain acquisition of the bride by the groom. And I don't encourage around it. Sometimes the couple will say, oh yeah, let's do that. That's the traditional language. We would like the traditional language. But I don't push on it because it's very hard for me to see it and not see the fullness of its history, not see the ways in which in Orthodox communities, that language is what prevents a woman from being able to get a divorce. I see all of that. I see, suffering agunot, women, who cannot get divorced. I see that when I look at the phrase. And I'm sorry for that because the authors of that phrase did not intend the suffering that came to some people through it. But I see it. So I don't push that language. But that's why I think, our tradition has language that is beautiful and ancient. So Ruth and Naomi, for instance, I will offer that language. Jonathan and David say this thing. They say, Hine Adonai beni uvencha ad olam. Behold how Adonai, or how the greatness of all that is here in this field between the two of us. And they say this to each other as a kind of vow. Some couples use simply an ani ledodi v'dodi li, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine, which does imply a kind of mutual, not only belonging, but kind of acquisition. We belong to each other. All these words are ancient and beautiful and intensely and thoroughly Jewish. I will say, on sort of the practicalities you were asking about, I meet with couples over the course of at least a half a year before a wedding. I want to get to know them. It's an opportunity to have conversations about all sorts of things about married life that I notice couples welcome. They welcome being given assignments of having certain kinds of conversations. How do we disagree? How do we make decisions? If down the road we realize that we shouldn't be together, or one of us very much doesn't want to be together anymore, what are we going to commit to each other about what that process will look like? I ask them to talk about end of life, about illness and death. And I remind them that one member of the couple dying and the other member of the couple taking care of them as they die, that is the happy ending. That is not like the tragedy that gets in the way of the marriage. That's exactly what we're promising to each other. Not that at age whatever, at age 20 something or 30 something, you need to make final decisions about something that, God willing, won't happen until age 90 something. But to make sure that none of these topics are taboo in the relationship. I also ask people to talk about monogamy and non-monogamy. Working with queer couples, that's kind of obvious because the culture is very different around monogamy and non-monogamy. Queer couples are used to making those decisions and having those conversations about, what is going to be the sexual nature of our relationship? What are the limits? What are the invitations? What are the opennesses? What are going to be the rules that allow us to hold each other with great respect and care? I think most heteronormative couples don't think about that, which is why we have a whole culture in which movies and television shows are built on the idea that the worst possible thing someone can do to someone else is to cheat on them. The word cheat is the only word in the English language that we even have for something like that. So it's important to me to sort of introduce to all couples the idea that we have agency over what that will look like. And if we do something different than what's traditional, what are the consequences of that, and how are we going to hold that? And how can we revisit it and reconsider it at different points in our relationship as we grow and change, and who we are with each other grows and changes?
There is something here in what you're describing that's really quite different from when you ask a friend to perform your wedding, because it's unlikely that your friend is going to ask you some of these questions, which are really, really important questions. Often we default to the other side, which means only a rabbi can perform a wedding because rabbis are trained to ask these questions. And just listening to you makes me wonder if there's a third way, if there's some office that needs to exist in the world that is a wedding officiant. And I mean, obviously that exists, but I mean, that's something that really should be, both in Judaism and beyond Judaism, should be, it's not a rabbi. It doesn't have to be a clergy, somebody who is seen as a religious figure in the kind of God sort of way, if that's not your bag. But it's somebody who is trained and somebody who's really not your friend, because they're able to ask you some really hard questions that a friend is going to have a hard time asking.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the person who's officiating, right? You could also have, what is some premarital process that people go through with a guide or a series of guides, or, a self-guided journey that you can do over time.
Partially just from a capacity standpoint personally, but I tend to really strongly encourage forms of premarital counseling and have some people that I might point in the direction, but I tend not to do it myself with couples, partially because a lot of the folks I work with, I'm not a leader of a spiritual community in the way that you are, where I have congregants. A lot of the people asking me are more like my friends, but it would be really great if folks had as a more normative part of the process that kind of prep work, and not just the finding vendors prep work.
Yeah, I'll tell you, right. On the vendor list, Rabbi Irwin. And also watching them make some of those, I don't involve myself in some of those conversations. Those are conversations for them to have. But for, how do you fight, or what would you want from each other in case of breaking up? I ask them, we have that conversation in front of me, and you can learn a lot about a couple and how well they communicate. Is one person talking? How are they holding each other's discomfort? You can learn a lot about who people are as a couple. But it also, the other thing that being part of those conversations does is it also deepens your respect for and care for and love for this couple. I find that by the time I'm under the chuppah with a couple, I am in love with them. I'm under the chuppah and I'm holding back tears. Sometimes as a rabbi, you're called upon to do a funeral of somebody that you never met. And everything you know about them, you learn 24 hours before the funeral. And that's a hard place to be, because you can't really hold it in your heart in the way that you can if it's a congregant that you've known for years, where you're not sharing the sorrow. But with a couple that whose wedding you're officiating, you have the time to grow in your understanding and appreciation of them, so that you are you are part of the joy, that you share the joy with them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I try to conceptualize myself when I'm officiating, not just a wedding, but any Jewish event. I use, because I'm a sports guy, I always use the analogy of being the point guard in basketball and not the coach. Because like if you think you're the coach, if you think that you are sort of running things and instructing and like then the players have to follow, that's different than if you are like you're the point, like you're actually a player yourself. Like I am trying to be a davener if I'm praying. I'm trying to be an attendee. Like when I'm an officiant, I'm also an attendee. Like yeah. I always stay for unless there's a real reason I can't, I try to stay for the reception because it actually sends a message that I am not just sort of doing the job in the way you were just talking about, but actually I'm up there modeling the celebration. Like when I clap at the seventh blessing that gets very sing-song in the traditional melody, it's not just that I'm clapping, it's that I'm cueing the room that they're clapping, right? Like you said something that is my basic prerequisite for when I can see people as my Rebbes. I have a lot of Rebbes, so I don't mean to like overwhelm you by making you feel, Irwin, oh my gosh, I'm one of Lex's Rebbes. But like, I also do want you to feel good about that. You are comfortable publicly saying that you have serious problems with a Jewish ritual. I think most rabbis have serious problems with many Jewish rituals. But when you talked about Hareat and you talked about how it is that the phrase of ring exchange that is tied historically to the chaining of women who are unable to get a divorce, you named it, and I did not sense from you any sliver of, oh gosh, I'm saying something negative about Jewish tradition and people could feel less connected to it. I think a lot of rabbis, they don't feel comfortable doing that. And you said specifically that you don't really lobby, I don't remember the language you use, but you don't push, you don't lobby, you don't encourage the traditional language, Hareat, versus these other options. You name it and you give others. To me, what that points to is when you're officiating a wedding, the job that it isn't is being an advocate for Jewish tradition.
Right.
We've made weddings like a battleground. And rabbis think that what their job is, well, we're going to get this couple. Like this couple is like sort of at risk, quote unquote, of either being or not being like affiliated, whatever, or like connected to Judaism, caring about Judaism, especially with interfaith couples, but even with Jewish couples, like this wedding, it's like a contact point of Jewish tradition. And if it's really meaningful, then they'll be bought in and they'll want to do Jewish. And if they have children, like, I truly don't process that for 1 second when I am considering, I'm just not at war for Jewish. And my sense is that you're not either. But I'd love to hear your reflections on that, because I think for a lot of rabbis and others officiating, even if they're not rabbis, like subconsciously, like this doing work for Judaism or the Jewish future is actually as important or more important than it doing work for the couple and the gathered community there. And I think I couldn't disagree with anything more than that.
Right. Yeah, there's this big question of who is my client? Is my client Jewish tradition, or is my client these living, breathing human beings in front of me? And back to what Sarah Tauber said about the hidden pastoral question. These people are coming and saying, we want Jewish. They're coming and saying, we want Jewish. That's why they show up. That's why they're knocking on my door. If we limit our Jewish to like the words that we have received historically and we don't let them breathe, we don't let them change, then we're giving them a dead Judaism. We're giving them an artifact, and nobody needs more schmunzes on the shelf. We have the chance to breathe new life into Jewish. If Jewish can be standing under a tree in the forest saying, Ki el asher telech elech, where you go, I will go. How romantic and how exciting is that? And what new promise of Judaism is that giving to this couple, of a Judaism that can be, where they can be at the center of it and not be told they're at the margins of it and they have to do something to move towards the center. This tradition is here for me, for my use, for my growth, for the enhancement of my spiritual life and my existence on this planet. And I do think that forcing people into ritual or into forms that feel foreign or wrong or uncomfortable for them is not a winning strategy for the future of Judaism. I have now been doing this long enough, Baruch Hashem, that I am bar mitzvahing the kids of couples that I married 15 years ago. And these are couples who tiptoed in, for whom it was a real stretch to come to a rabbi and say, what would it be like for Judaism to play a role here? And now, I'm doing the B'nai Mitzvah of their children. The more that we can say yes, the wider we can open the doors, the more we can be welcomers rather than gatekeepers, the brighter the future of Judaism.
I also think that the strategy of doing traditional Jewish things in a wedding or anything, just sort of because it's Jewish tradition, it's lazy. I don't want to be overly disrespectful, but I do kind of want to call out that if the reason to have a ketubah, to, have a wedding document that is an articulation of commitments between the couple and that often is even in traditional form, in like an art piece in a home, if the reason is that Jews have had ketubahs for a long time, that's fine, but it's not all that good an argument to somebody who is medium on whether they're going to do things or want to do things that Jews have done for a long time. If the reason is, wow, what a cool process for a couple, and a lot of couples I work with, they come to English text that they want to write and then they have a Hebrew speaker translate it into Hebrew. But like, even if it was like, what a cool process to look at other pre-written texts on, ketubah.com that are in English and see which resonates for us, which doesn't. That actually is a great conversation opener to some of the conversations you said couples should have.
Yes.
You look at 13 different options, some of them very traditional. That's actually a beautiful exercise for any couple. If I were working with, I had a couple reach out to me just a few days ago, neither of whom is Jewish, who asked if I might help them with their wedding. And I think I'm going to say to them, they're not going to have a ketubah in a classic Jewish sense, but I think I'm going to actually encourage them to write down in some form, and if they want to turn it into an art piece, cool, like their commitments to each other. Because I think independent of the Jewish, that's just a really good thing to do. So I think it would help us if the reasons we're doing things are that we actually find power in the particular element we're talking about, and not, oh, well, that's the thing we've done, so we keep it. The question I have is that you brought in being in a tree in the forest and saying those words from the book of Ruth. And that points to something powerful, which is that I think for you, and for me certainly, sacredness, just as it's not in a particular set of Hebrew words, but it can be in many different kinds of words, it doesn't live in like one particular space or one particular set of spaces. And that comes through in your book, which is a profound and interesting, wandering act, where 1 second you're in Chicago, where you grew up, another you're in Sonoma County, where you live now, another you're in Germany, another you're in France, another you're in Jerusalem. But it's not a travel journal. It's finding moments of sacredness in some expected and some unexpected places. And so whether this is a continuation of the wedding piece, if you have thoughts about like weddings in forests, weddings in other places, that's great. But I'm kind of asking you about, to what degree is your undergirding teaching to what you're saying about weddings and to what you're saying in your book, that we should be striving to find sacredness in a richer diversity of spaces and words?
Thank you for that question, and also for plugging my book, Shekhinah at the Art Institute by Irwin Keller, available at all of your favorite booksellers. Yeah, I guess it's interesting, actually, having the book out there. It's only been out for a little while, and hearing people interpret it back to me, because they're putting words to things that I feel, but I haven't been able to articulate other than through telling stories. And I think you put your finger on something, Lex, that, we live in multiple worlds at the same time. We live in a world in which we're doing our laundry and cooking dinner, and we live in a world in which there is nothing but divine energy, nothing but that sparkle. And we're in all of these at the same time, in the way that you walk from a dark space to a light space and your eyes have to adjust. If you let your eyes adjust, you can see between the worlds. So how do we make it so that at any moment, at any important moment, or at a moment that we've already decided is unimportant, we can adjust our vision and see, where's the divine here? What is flowing through here? What is sacred in this moment? I have this thing called photic sneeze reflex, which is when I walk into sunshine, I sneeze 3 times. And then I'm good for about 20 minutes. And then if a cloud passes in front of the sun and the sun comes back out, I sneeze 3 times. So maybe that's my role, is that when I notice this divine light, I sneeze in the form of telling stories, in the form of publishing something, in the form of trying to call attention to it. And as that applies to weddings, yeah. I mean, I also happen to live in a super beautiful part of the world, and a super beautiful part of the world where you can have an outdoor wedding 7 months of the year and not have to worry about rain. I've done only a handful of indoor weddings. My weddings are always on a cliff or under a tree or someplace that helps us all feel that what's happening here in this transformation is not just something intimate and domestic, but in that moment, these two people are the center of the cosmos, and the past and the future meet at these two people, enhancing that sense of the cosmic significance that you were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, Lex, by not having it in the expected space, not having it in the social hall, but somehow finding the way to break people's eyes open while this is happening is something that will add to the sacredness, that will bring the sacredness to this ceremony.
I have been reflecting on weddings in a slightly different way recently, and I'm curious whether this is part of what you think about. I've recently entered a new stage of life, which is that I'm an empty nester. So my kids are in college, and it's actually, I think, the first stage of life that I've entered where I was profoundly conscious of it, in the sense that when you're a kid and you have a bar mitzvah, it's like way too young. Generally, it was for me. When you get married, again, if you get married at a relatively young age, I mean, I was 30, but still, as I reflect on it, it feels like I was young. And I was excited and just thinking about what was happening to me. And I just sort of assumed a lot of things, and I didn't think that hard about it. And then when we had children a few years later, it felt like, yeah, that's just a thing that's happening. And I remember reflecting on it a little bit, saying, how weird that this stranger is going to come and live in our house for the next 20 years, and we don't even know this person. And so there was some element that I was conscious of a little bit, but not profoundly conscious that I was entering a new stage of life. Now I'm experiencing this profound mixture of excitement for my children, but also real sadness for me and for my wife, that our lives have changed deeply and profoundly because of something that another person has done, namely go to college, right? And when I think about a wedding with relation to that, I'm thinking, like, there are people in the room for whom this is a mixed occasion. Of course, they're very excited for the couple, but I mean, thinking about it as a parent, I haven't had a child get married yet, but it's a wonderful, and you're gaining an in-law, and there's going to be additions that are going to come, but there is a real subtraction. You know, your child is, like, my wife and I were just talking about how the kids are in college, but they still come home for the summer. There's going to be a time when they don't come home for the summer anymore. Like, that's going to be the real change. And so when somebody gets married, it's kind of like, wow, now they're really on their own.
Their spouse is often their next of kin, and not their parent. Like, a reverend I worked with at a co-officiated wedding recently said that to the parents and the couple together. It's like literally they're transforming who their closest person in the world is.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I haven't experienced this myself yet, but I'm conscious enough of life transitions in a way that I wasn't before to know that, wow, I think I am going to feel that. And they're also, I think, also about the kind of maybe less quite profound, but I mean, when you think about people getting married, you often think, like, these were people that had a bunch of friends, and they were an individual person in that group of friends, and in a certain way, they're going to be lost to that group of friends because they're no longer that one person. That doesn't always happen, but there is this sense that a couple is different from an individual. So I guess I'm saying that there's a lot of people that are in that room that may be experiencing this as, you know, to say it's a little bit like a funeral is an overstatement. But there is an element of loss happening. And I'm wondering, this feels to me like something that really only the officiant would know. And the couple doesn't know it, and the parents probably don't know it well enough to be able to articulate it, and the friends certainly don't know it. And yet there's something really potentially powerful in naming it and in doing something in that ceremony that's going to help those people kind of get through what might be a hard period in their life.
Our lives run ahead of our ability to have thoughts about it. And so do our children, right? Our children, we're always several steps behind our children. We're never quite up to date on who they are. And that's just a fact of parenting. That's just something you can't get away from. I just want to come back with lots of love and sympathy around being an empty nester. I think about the book of Deuteronomy, Devarim in Hebrew, right? It's the 5th book. And it's just a look back. It's primarily Moses doing a look back. And what is the role of when you get to the part of your life where you can do a look back, where you finally have this enough perspective to look back and say, wow, look who I was, me as a kid, me as a teenager, me as a college student, me falling in love, me falling out of love, me falling in love, children, all the years of schlepping children to rehearsals and gymnastics. And now this couple, this transformation has happened, and there's this new entity in the world, and it's going to have force and ripples, these two people. That's big. I think it's really big to be able to look back, do a look back, and retell your story to yourself and see how the pieces fit together in a way that's hard to do when you're in the middle of it. And I love the idea of recognizing that somehow with the parents. And that can come in a variety of ways. It can come in the ceremony. It can come in the warm-up to the ceremony. It can come at a ketubah signing. Also, I think a role for the parents in a ceremony is beautiful. And one of the things that I often do is either in addition to or sometimes instead of the traditional 7 blessings, I'll ask the couple to choose 7 people to offer blessings. And I offer up prompts for themes for these blessings based on the Sheva Brachot, the traditional 7 blessings. And that's a wonderful opportunity and the prompt I give is I ask people to look at what is something related to this theme. What is a way that I or we as a couple are blessed that we want to wish for you? And it becomes a real opportunity for parents to actually look at their own marriage, at their own life together and the family they created, and then to offer up something of value from that as a bracha for their kids who are getting married.
I really think, Dan, you've brought a really important piece. I mean, honestly, the loss of a wedding and the loss of other positively inflected religious occasions. I think this comes up at Bar Mitzvah. Parents will often talk about how you're not so young anymore and there is a transformation happening. I think you're right that because we treat weddings as this paradigmatic joy day, which it is, we are uncomfortable naming the things that are not just purely joy. I do think that we have a built-in thing in a Jewish ceremony that is about brokenness, breaking the glass. Now, I've said in the past on this podcast, and I'm going to stand by it for now, that I tend not to say words at all before that. I tend not to give an explanation of what that is standing for. I do think that naming in a program or finding ways at another point in the ceremony to mention that there are some of those layers of transformation for people in the room would be worthwhile. I mean, it's patriarchal, and people that I work with tend not to use this language, but there is the traditional language of a father, giving their daughter away, right, as they walk them down the aisle. I'm not going to encourage folks to do that in terms of the language. I do think that naming that you're not giving a person away, but there is a loss. There's a
letting go. There's a letting go.
There's a tashlich. A release, a letting go. I do want to close with one more book shout out, not because I'm your publicist, but because I really think it's related and I think it's a great book that I want people to read. You titled it Shekhinah at the Art Institute. And that, in my view, hints at what I was saying before about finding sacredness in unexpected places and all around the world and all that. I happen to love the Art Institute in Chicago specifically. I have a long-standing, deep relationship to that place. I grew up in Milwaukee, and we went on a field trip there when I was in 6th grade or something. And I was not expecting it to be Okay, we're going to an art museum. Like, that's fine. Like, excited to go to Chicago for the day. That's cool. You don't get to not be at school when you go to school most mornings. Then I went and I was like totally enthralled. And I made a point whenever I was in Chicago moving forward to try and go to the Art Institute. You actually, in your book, it was eerie to me. You talked about the Thorn Rooms, this specific thing in the basement, and you talked about Sunday Afternoon, that famous painting by Seurat that's like this majestic thing. I remember, and I don't have a good memory. Like, I remember my first time there. So part of me wants to hear your Torah of the Art Institute, and I have in the book, but as a window into it, like, I want to close this episode in a strange way, which will probably be a cliffhanger, but like, give us some of your Torah of Shekhinah at the Art Institute. And I do actually mean specifically that place with this question. And I'm not asking because that piece is the whole book. You don't stay in the Art Institute for the full 150 pages, but as a window into how you generate wisdom in interesting places like that.
For me, living in this world is so much about trying to experience wonder. We have habits of experiencing wonder in certain kinds of environments. We sometimes experience it in nature. We sometimes experience it in team sports. We experience it at concerts. And we experience it, some of us, walking into an art museum and there's a Monet water lily painting. In some of those cases, we feel comfortable saying, oh, wow, it was wonderful. Like I felt something. Maybe we don't say it, I don't know, but we experience it. But it's a lot harder, I think, for people to be okay with experiencing that in religious environments. We have a way of letting our words and our hopes and our expectations and our traumas and our longings and the weight of thousands of years of history has a way of squeezing the wonder out of things. And for me, the joy of being in relationship with Judaism in my life is the joy of re-releasing the wonder, letting it ripple out, because there's so much wonder to be had. If the people that we're doing Jewish with are not experiencing wonder, then we need to look at what we're doing and think about doing it differently.
Thank you so much, Irwin Keller, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
It's so nice, Dan, it's so nice to meet you, and Lex, it's always a treat to be with you.
And thanks so much to all of you out there for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. Also, of course, Happy New Year! Shana Tova, everyone. We hope that your entry into 5785 has been deeply meaningful and joyous. We hope it was unbound and exciting, and that your arc towards Yom Kippur is also going to be inspiring for you. We hope that this new year brings increased joy and meaning to our world, which is greatly in need of it. And we want to encourage you as we start the new year to maybe bring in a little bit of Jewish learning and unlearning to your life. So you can do so by heading to the Anya Shiva's website, judaismunbound.com/classes, and you can see all 4 of our fall semester 8-week courses that are available right now. Dan mentioned them at the top, but as a reminder, amazing courses featuring Lainey Solomon, Juan Mejia, Sarah Imhoff, and Alicia Jo Rabins as our teachers, an amazing crew. We hope that you will check out their classes and take in their Torah. So we also want, as we close, to encourage you to be in touch with us. If you have thoughts about this episode, any of our past wedding episodes, our general arc of recent episodes exploring high holidays, or anything else, and you can be in touch in any of the following ways. First, there's our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram handles. All of those are at Judaism Unbound. Second, there's our website, judaismunbound.com, where you can find show notes for this episode, including a link to purchase Irwin Keller's amazing new book, Shekhinah at the Art Institute. And you can email us at dan@judaismunbound.com or lex@judaismunbound.com. We are greatly appreciative if you're able to support us with either a monthly recurring donation or a one-time gift. And you can do that via judaismunbound.com/donate. So thank you so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.